So,
Okay.
take it away, Chris.
All right. Thank you so much. So today we're going to talk about submitting your paper. We're going to go over some initial information about submitting it, contacting the journal and so forth. And then we'll go into some of the parts of the paper. And then we'll conclude with addressing some issues around referees and making revisions and that kind of thing. And then at the end, Richard and Ann will do some summary and maybe make some final comments. And we welcome any of you to ask questions or to make comments as we go on with this. So let's begin with the first slide. So today we're talking about submitting your paper. And this is basically one of Richard's outlines, and we refer you to Publishing Addiction Science for additional, more in-depth comments. But this is revised based on current data. So the first slide is what do you need to do before you even submit your paper? Think of this as a stage-by-stage process. I know I personally get overwhelmed if I think of the whole project initially, but if I break it down into parts, it's a lot easier for me. The paper will only be good as the content and the methods you have chosen. It seems like a simple statement, but it is so important to make sure that you have the right methods for the questions you're asking. Remember to read the author guidelines. I can't emphasize this enough. I know with our journal, we really are sticklers around authors responding to the guidelines. We don't even want to look at a paper that doesn't have the correct referencing style. We use APA, and so we're real sticklers around that. So we don't even want to look at a paper, even send it out for review if the author hasn't followed the guidelines, like first person language and that kind of thing. Also, as I was saying, spacing, not anonymizing, etc., will delay the process and really can be frustrating for the editor. So you don't want to annoy the editor. I know Richard's brought this up several times. It's so important. Next slide. And this, I do get many, not letters, I get emails from many authors with their titles or their topic area. Sometimes they'll send the abstract. Sometimes, unfortunately, they send the whole paper or their dissertation even, which is not appropriate. But a brief letter with the title of your paper to ask the editor if their journal responds to topics of this sort or are interested in this area of research, and that's always a good idea. It sets a good tone with the editor as well. And then this is a time also in your email to the editor to ask some awkward questions like, how flexible are they on the paper length? This can be very helpful if you have, especially if you're reporting on qualitative research, tend to be a little longer because you use some quotes. But perhaps your quantitative report is a bit lengthy, so you want to make sure that this will work with that journal. Because these kinds of things influence your decision. So if the response is favorable from the editor, then begin writing. Or if you've already written your paper, then go ahead and submit it again, looking at the author guidelines, looking at the journal itself and see how the titles are for the papers that are published. Now, if you have an unfavorable response from the editors, start looking for another journal. Ask your colleagues. Maybe do an online search and see what journals are interested in your topic area. Again, make sure that they're not predatory journals. We talked a little bit about that, and we'll talk more about that at another point. Now, chapter 3 in a Publishing Addiction Science, this lists descriptive information of many addiction journals. That's very, very helpful. I really like that book because it's written in a manner that's easy to understand. It's not real complicated. There's not an emphasis on using words that are obtuse. I really like it a lot. In fact, I could even say I love that book. It's so well written.
And it's free.
Say that, Richard.
And it's free. If you want to download it, it's free.
Great, that's right. That's wonderful. All right. Next slide, please. So, of course, it's important that your paper is original. Sometimes people do publish papers to support research that's out there. Maybe there's not a lot of findings on your topic area, so you're reinforcing that. You've duplicated someone else's paper. Someone else's research, and that's fine too. Especially again, as I said, if there's very little research on the topic. But you want to make clear what it is that you're doing. What's your original contribution? Science journals do exist primarily to publish original knowledge. So be sure to include that in your response, in your inquiry to the editor, or in your paper in the beginning. Describe what's original about your analyses in your initial letter to the editor. It should be evident in the title if possible and the abstract. It should also be described in the introduction and then the discussion section or the conclusion. And that's so important because this is the essence of why you're publishing your report. And we often call published papers on research reports. You'll hear that a lot in your among your colleagues. Next slide, please. So sometimes we get in our journal these long, kind of winding titles. You don't want to do that. You want to keep the title. It doesn't need to be 2 or 3 words, but it should be concise and to the point. It's crucial, and think about this, that's going to be the first thing that is in the databases. So that'll bring up your paper. I mean, people put keywords as well, but it's crucial in the dissemination of your paper. It kind of will grab the eye of the reader. This is what will show up in the searches. So it needs to describe, as we said, the research issue and the importance of the paper. Write a title in the same style as other titles for your chosen journal. I think I mentioned this. Look at the journal that you're submitting to, and see what the other titles are that are submitted in the table of contents of a typical issue of the journal. So you want to write your title in the same style. This will ensure or increase the assurance of getting published, because they'll just feel like, okay, this fits. I mean, they won't even consciously think of that, but that'll come into their thinking. Avoid trendy and cute titles, as they're soon outdated and will be embarrassing to have on your CV. I must admit, I did at one time in 1979 use a catchy title. I was writing a paper on PCP, and I called it Angel Dust Not Heaven Sent. It ended up being the cover article of that journal issue. So sometimes it is okay, but just want to be careful of that in general.
I think it's a brilliant title, Chris.
Say that?
I think it's a brilliant title because it is not just trendy or cute. It actually says something quite important in the second part of that title. So that was a good title. So sorry to interrupt. Sorry.
No. That's what I thought too, but I didn't want. Thank you for saying that. Okay, next slide, please. So here's I like the idea of the abstract, because in a way it's kind of an outline of your paper. Richard asked you to write abstract. Just create an abstract, and it kind of helps organize your thinking. So I like that, the idea of doing that. So it summarizes how you carried out your research and what you learned. You don't want this to be very long. Usually they're about 40 words. And Anne and Richard can add to that length if they want to. But generally that's to kind of keep that as a ballpark. And there's a structure to abstracts, and we'll go over that. And it's established practice for most journals. It makes it easier to write and understand. Things you want to avoid, you don't want to go beyond what you establish in your paper. You don't want to talk about any speculation that you have. You want to avoid that. Number one, it takes away from yourself as a scholar, so you want to avoid that. Just stick to what you found and conclusions from that. So no non-significant results, no telegraphic style. Stay within the account limit, as I said. A good abstract is crucial as it sums up the whole paper. It is also what prospective readers will first see when they search for the paper on indexes and databases. So this is crucial, that your abstract represents your work in a concise way. Now, next slide, please. Okay, literature review. Anne and I were talking the other day, and Anne mentioned some whole courses can be presented on literature reviews. Literature reviews are not easy to write, a good one, and it takes some careful understanding. There's good information in the text that Publishing Addiction Science, and I would strongly recommend taking a look at that. The comprehensiveness and brevity make literature reviews very difficult. So this, I would highly recommend a careful review of this section of Publishing Addiction Science. I think somebody might not be muted. I'm not sure. So do not use many references to support each point. One or two are sufficient. And sometimes people, if there's several reports on that show a specific finding, pick the key ones, the major papers. Unless it's something very important in terms of your own research, you can include some additional references. Go from the general point of the research area to the specific. So you want to start out a little broader and then refine your research question. Next slide, please. So the method, this is the next area that you want to look at after the review. Anybody should be able to, any researcher should be able to duplicate your research with another sample. So it should be pretty clear what method you used and how you used it. So with RCTs, randomized controlled trials, editors may refer you to the consort statement. So this allows for consolidated standards for reporting trials. The purpose is to improve the quality of reporting. This kind of gives us a kind of cookie cutter, if you will, list of items that you need to include in your reporting of your clinical trials. There's so many different guidelines that you can use that help, like the PRISMA guidelines for systematic reviews. There are several of them, and you can look at these again in the addictions science, reporting addiction science. You want mistakes that you want to avoid is overwriting. Remember, it should be a report of what you have found, and underwriting, not explaining fully what you have found. Sometimes it's hard when we're writing ourselves to kind of see what we're really saying there. So to have a colleague look at even your abstract is really helpful, because they can see it with a fresh eye. Do not report, as we said, non-significant results. If results are not significant, they should be reported as such. Don't be afraid to do that. Papers that show that there's no significant results are important papers as well, because they let us know that, gee, this didn't, maybe we should do something a little bit differently. This did not show any significant results. Okay, next slide, please. So again, I just want to just say something about results. Don't discuss in the results. Just list the facts, what you found. Here's in discussion section is where you discuss the results. So you describe your per the literature review and policy issues, new issues poorly addressed by others. This is where you want to cite the issues you included in the introduction, but do not introduce new literature here unless your findings confirm something unexpected. This is where your paper needs to explain these results thoroughly. And it's not that easy for the discussion. You don't want to ramble, but remember that you do want to fully explain your results. Again, limit speculation. You do want to outline future research in 1 or 2 lines, but you don't want to say something like more research is needed. Obviously, more research is needed. It's always needed. But you might specifically say what area of research is needed. Now that would be helpful for the reader. All right, next slide, please. So after the discussion, now you can come up. Now you're ready to write. What are you concluding from everything you've done, from your results and from your discussion? You want to finish your paper then with a brief section on conclusions. This is where you reiterate the main findings and show how important they are for the topic you are researching. I find that the conclusions tend to be a little easier for me because after I finished this presenting the results and discussing them, I have a really good idea now of how I want to conclude this, and you will as well. It's the opportunity to finish your paper by saying how important your research is. So you can toot your own horn here in terms of course, based on the facts of your paper. Next slide, please. And don't be afraid to talk about the limitations. You know, perhaps you weren't able to get a random sample, or your sample was small. It shows your intelligence and you as a scholar when you talk about your limitations, and it makes you. It shows that you understand research and understand what you were trying to do and what and the parts you were unable to do, and it makes the reader feel more safer with you, if you will, comfortable with the fact that you're not afraid to share that. And you don't have to apologize. I mean, nobody does perfect research. I've been involved in systematic random trials myself, and even in those, there are opportunities for error. And so you always want to, don't be afraid to share that limitations. It will be picked up by the reviewers or the editor, so you might as well put it out there. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, appendices, tables, and figures. You don't want to include too many figures or tables. I know when Ann and I we're overwhelmed with figures and tables, we do ask the researcher to limit those. The good thing about tables and figures that excuse me, I'm just going to get a drink of water here. You don't want to include just a whole bunch of data in the narrative of your paper. It's overwhelming to the reader, and they really can't see it that well. But if you can put that information in a table or for the reader to see in full, that's very, very helpful. So, but again, you want to limit those. Maybe what, 5 should be sufficient. If you need more, then I mean that's it can be okay, but you want to check with the editor. You also want to check with the editor about appendices, how many and what the length of those can be. So because these decisions can influence your text. You want to avoid it gets too many pages as appendices. This is not, you don't want more appendices than the length of your paper, of course. This is not so important if your paper is going to be published online, but it is important for hard copy version. And the editors have, journals have a certain page limit per issue, and then their overall page limit for the year. So they're going to be very conscious of paper length. So you want to be as well. Some papers are submitted with supplementary files, and this same applies to these as to appendices. So again, I would just check with the editor, and they'll let you know too. All right, next slide, please. Again, the references, make sure they're in the style, like APA style of the journal. Again, looking at the instructions for authors. Sometimes the instructions for authors are in the hard copy of the journal, or there is a link, or the editor will say, usually in the front of the journal, where the instructions for authors are online. But I always go to that first as an author, and I look at the instructions for authors, and I look at the at samples of one of their journal issues, and 1 or 2 of them, to see the style, the title, and how things are presented, and the length of papers. It's very helpful to do that. So the references, don't forget that they allow the reader to retrace all the evidence that you cite. So make sure, what I always tell authors to do is look at your references and take each reference and then locate it in the paper, and then do the opposite. Go through all your citations in the paper and make sure you have a reference for those. So go both ways. Go look from the references to the paper, and then from the citations to the references. And this ensures that you don't have additional references in there that don't belong, or that you've cited something and you don't have a reference for it. This is really bad to do that, to make those kinds of mistakes, because that's the evidence for your paper, and it's key. So there's all different types of reference styles. So just follow the one that's with your journal. If the references in APA are in alphabetical order, from the surname of the first author, and they should be full, and not 2 authors plus at all, unless there's a very large number of authors for the paper cited. I think in APA it's 7 or more, but I'm not absolutely certain of that. Verify if foreign language titles require translation. If they do, translate them in the first copy sent to the editor. All right, next slide, please. Feedback before submission. This is key. As I mentioned earlier, it's really great to have a colleague read your paper. Make sure that you are not repetitive, or are clear, are concise. It makes sense. It's easy to read. So it's like key to have a colleague read the paper. It's like they see things you don't see, and I'm always amazed. Wow, I didn't even see that. Thank you so much. When I have a colleague read my paper, even experienced authors can make mistakes, believe it or not, which they fail to see on rereading the paper because they're so familiar with it. They just they see sometimes things that are not there. So fresh eyes on the paper can pick up mistakes and non sequiturs, things that don't belong, like, why do you have that sentence? It doesn't make any sense, doesn't fit there. So that's really helpful. Again, don't be offended by either the reviews from the referees or from your colleagues, anything that they can help you with makes your paper stronger. And don't forget, always remember your name is on it. So any feedback you get that can make your paper better, just be grateful for it rather than offended. I really think that's so important. All right, next slide, please. So now let's get into the process of submitting. So as an editor, I never want to waste the referee's time, the reviewer's time, because I need those reviewers. I'm not paying them. Maybe some of them will get continuing education units for their review, but that's about it. And a big thank you at the end of the year. So I don't want to waste their time with papers that are poorly written or that don't follow the instructions for authors. So I won't send those papers out for review. And what does that do to you as an author? It delays a paper that you worked on. It makes your references slowly get out of date, which you don't want. So you want a rapid review. You want rapid publishing. That's your goal as an author. So you don't want to waste their time. So you want to submit the best paper possible initially. So the importance of originality, or importance of your paper, or how original it is, the reviewer's concerns, any fatal flaws, the journal philosophy, and they usually have this right up front in their journals or on their website, what they're looking for. Space available, any editorial work that's required. So this is what the final decision of the editor will depend on. So you want to try to make sure that you have addressed these things initially. Again, it's okay. You don't have to have the perfect paper, but you will get feedback from the referees. So be prepared for that. And almost every paper has to have some revision. So it's not unusual at all. It's very rarely that papers are accepted without any revision. Next slide, please. So papers are triaged by the editor and their staff before they send out for peer reviews. These are the common reasons for instant rejections. These are the things you want to avoid. So it's outside the scope of the journal. And again, you've already submitted an inquiry to the editor. You have looked at typical papers published in that journal, so that you don't have to worry about being outside the scope of the journal if you've done your homework. The manuscript type is unacceptable. It doesn't fit. Like sometimes we'll get a paper for our journal, which is a nursing addictions journal, that may be on some obscure or some paper on a I can't think of what I'm trying to say. Too early in the morning here. On say what am I trying to think of? Help me out, you guys. On a tool that is so obscure that that we really is outside the scope of our journal. So we might suggest they send it to a journal that publishes on reliability and validity of tools. The manuscript type is unacceptable. We may not, publish that type of manuscript. They ignore the instructions for authors. This is key.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I find is that, because my journal is called the Journal of Substance Use, and I have had very strange papers from places like Iran looking at graphene, a new substance, and people don't understand what the topic of the journal is. But I also, because it's basically a social science journal, if I get papers that are very, very medical, I would send those back and suggest they go to some more medical journals, because that doesn't really fit in with the sort of thing that we publish.
Yes. So it's kind of a courtesy to the author too. If you know of other journals that would take a paper that doesn't fit for your journal but fits in another journal, or maybe even a suggestion for a couple of different journals, it's very helpful to the author. And then if there's major methodological weaknesses like too few subjects, or clear ethical problems, then we'll also send the papers back. Purely descriptive, they're parochial, no hypotheses, no conclusions. Usually poorly written or poorly constructed research. Statistical analysis lacking or totally wrong. You know, most journals have experts on statistics as on their reviewer panel, and they'll send these papers to folks like that. And there's nothing new in it. Like we get so many papers sometimes on nurses' attitudes towards addictions. I mean, that subject has been beaten to death. So unless there's a new twist on it, we often reject another paper on that, because it's easy to get subjects such as nurses to study. So so they keep that in mind as well. All right, next slide, please. So we have mentioned several times of paying attention to the instructions for authors. Ensure that the introduction summarizes previous work adequately. State the objectives of the work clearly. Doing something that has not been done before or is not enough. Why does it need to be done? This is important to be clear about. State the hypotheses to be tested. How will they be tested? Outline the plan of work, and don't include conclusions in the introduction. That's important. So the introduction is really kind of launches your work in a way. It kind of gives the reader, okay, here's the previous work. This is the objectives of what they're going to do. And this is why they're going to do it, because it hasn't been done before, and what we're going to test in the paper. So it's really a key piece of your paper is introducing the work. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier about responding to referee reports, respecting the comments from your colleagues when you have them look over your paper. Think of this as a gift. Be grateful for any responses back from the referees. It's free. It's free for you. And even if you end up being rejected and you have these the rationale for why you're rejected, you can revise your paper and send it to another journal. I mean, this is again free advice, really, advisement. So you want to construct a detailed reply to referees. Our journal, we definitely look at this. Often the author will write whatever comment, one of the comments from the referee, and then show a response underneath. That makes it easy for the editor and the reviewers again to take a look at what the referee suggested and then how you responded, and make sure that's detailed. Now, sometimes you want to say, no, I don't agree with what the referee said. The reason why I concluded this, or I studied this, or I made this comment is because of blah, blah, blah. And don't be afraid to do that. Sometimes the referees are not perfect. They make mistakes, or they may not understand what you were trying to do. So feel free to contradict and go against what the referee says, but make sure you have a good explanation for that. So make your revisions to deal with the major criticisms, and then explain why you have not dealt with the rest. Describe each change you make. Refer the reader to the relevant page in the revised manuscript. Highlight changes in the text in a different color. This is helpful. If there are important or major changes, recommend that you are not absolutely sure or wrong. Present a polite, logical argue rebuttal. And I find that I never really, honestly, have ever in all my years of editing seen a kind of a negative or a inappropriate response from authors. Usually they're very polite and they give a clear, logical argument of why they're not following whatever the referee said. If you don't want to make any of the changes, take a break and look at it another day, because usually you're angry or upset or hurt by the comments. And that as an author, especially when I was younger, I would react to the reviewers' comments, like, did they really understand my paper, or don't they see how wonderful this paper is? If I took a break from it and I come back another time, I can see a little more clearly, and it's helpful to do that. So thank you. The next slide, please. If you've made major changes by rewriting whole sections of paper, state that you have done so. I mean, this is important to let the editor know that you've done that much work. If you just inserted or deleted a few words, make clear which words are track changes so that referees can see something that has been done. If there was just some very minor changes in the paper that really don't affect anything, but they're just typographical or something very, very minor, the editor may not send it back to the referees again. The editor may make the decision him or herself. So it just depends on how extensive the changes that were made or needed to be done. If you're asked to shorten something, make sure you do it, at least by some extent, and state by how much. Engender trust. Never claim to have made changes when you have not done so. Unfortunately, I'm amazed. Sometimes I've gotten papers back that were not changed at all. I don't know if the author assumed we didn't look at them, or we didn't care, or they just assumed that we would just publish it and trust that the changes were made. Well, that never happens. Every paper that has been reviewed and the author responds and it comes and it's resubmitted, we always look at that. That's like key. So I don't know why, and it happens. I'm sure both Richard and Nan have gotten papers back that there were no changes. What?
I would agree with that very much, Chris, because if I get a paper where there are clear things that need doing and they haven't been done, and the paper just gets sent back, I'm more likely just to reject it on that basis, because it's wasting my time, it's wasting reviewers' time, and we have so many papers to deal with. You don't have time to mess around with people who can't be bothered to do it.
Exactly, and I mean, it can be one of the most common reasons for rejection, because they really annoy the editor when you do that, when people don't attend to that. So all right, next slide, please. Again, in your responses to the referee reports, keep your reply as short as possible, but make sure it's clear. 1 to 3 single-spaced pages. If the referee writes 3 lines and you need a page to rebut it, your argument will not be convincing. So try to keep it short. If the referee cannot understand your point, try to see how the misunderstanding has arisen and make changes so that it will not happen again. You may have to get help for that, and that's okay. You may have to ask a colleague, I'm not quite sure what they're asking me to do here. And that's helpful. If one person does not follow what you have written, the same may apply to other people. So again, that's key. The referee, again, is fresh eyes looking at your paper. So, and again, sometimes the way we write, it's not in logical sequence, and we haven't been efficient in our words and content. We may have a non sequitur in there that nobody picked up, and the referee may see this. So again, make sure you have colleagues read your paper again, and you want to make it clear. I mean, it's, you know, it's, I get ideas in my head of what I want to write, but you know what? Sitting down and writing it and making it clear and concise, it's difficult, isn't it? I think everybody on this call will agree that it's not easy to translate those ideas in your head down on a paper and make it efficient and clear. Answer questions raised by the referee in the manuscript, not in the cover letter. Okay, so do that in your response. All right, next slide, please. So, responding to referee reports. Spend a significant amount of time getting your reply to referees as near perfect as you can. The better you do that, again, when the referee relooks at your paper, they're going to be pleased when you've responded adequately to their requests or to their questions or their inquiries or their concerns. So if you respond in an appropriate, adequate way, they will be pleased by that. Otherwise, they may feel disrespected by your short or just dismissing their concerns. And that won't be good for you to have them annoyed at your response or the author's response. So maximize and stress agreements with what they write. So acknowledge their contribution. That's always a good thing. This is like the political statement here. If you want to be smart politically, you want to acknowledge and thank them. Just a good point. I did address this in the paper, as you can see, blah, blah, blah. Minimize disagreements, but not to the point of being dishonest, but you know, but you can, you know, you don't have to emphasize these. If you feel a referee shows a bias to a theoretical approach that differs from yours, for example, your paper is qualitative and they are a quantitative person, and you can see that obviously they don't understand qualitative, then you can perhaps separately ask the editor for another type of reviewer if you choose. If you feel a referee shows a bias that differs from yours, you can explain that there are different approaches, but yours is equally valid. So you can try to explain it in there, but sometimes that may go on deaf ears, as you know. There's a genuine difference of opinion, and you have a different but scientifically legitimate view. Don't do this unless you do have a strong case. And I think having good, solid qualitative research is a strong case. And that's often where I see problems. Next slide, please. Oh, that's the end, huh? Yeah. All right. Time for questions or comments?
Did you want me to just highlight a couple comments?
Sure.
That was really a very thorough